You think you're way more amenable to proof than you are. So, okay, so let's go into the golden calf
here.
You
should probably read the last verse of 31 before you get to 32, because it's
Please
the tablets.
do.
No, right. So when he had finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant, stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. So you need that as a plot point for what's about to happen.
Great.
Right?
So we've got the tablets. Great. Inscribed by
God. It's important.
Inscribed by the finger of God on stone, right, so that you don't forget them. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, well, he's up there communing with God, so you'd think they could have a little, and they know it, so you'd think they'd have a little patience with that. The people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, he's the political mediator, and said unto him, Up, make us some gods, which shall go before us. For as this Moses, the man that brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings. It really is a pretty comical story, isn't it? It's so preposterous. It's so pathetic. And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings, which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons and your daughters, and bring them unto me. It shows that the political without Moses, without the divine prophet, is instantly at the whim of the idiot populists. It's something like that, the faithless idiot populists. And all the people break off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, and he's just built it, right? Just made it. And when Aaron saw it, in love with his own creation, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings.
It's a feast for God. It's not, in Aaron's defense, it's not a feast to the calf.
Because it's the name of God.
To Yahweh.
He's not saying
okay.
It's a delaying tactic.
Yes, there were a lot of delaying tactics. Get your wives to give all their earrings over is perceived by the rabbis, right, as a delaying tactic.
That's not an easy conversation.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Hey, honey, I'll take that earring for a calf. What are you, nuts?
Yeah, okay. So when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and rose up to play. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go, get thee down, for thy people which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves.
Thy people.
Thy
it's
people.
No longer his people.
Right.
So actually, you'll see the wordplay here. It's extraordinary, because you see right here, God says to Moses, your people, and then Moses, for the next chapter and a half, essentially keeps saying, your people, your people, your people. The truth is that the very first time that Moses actually identifies the Israelites as his people is in the section that we'll get to in a little while, which it shows the romance between Moses and God and Moses and the Israelites. It's amazing. I mean, the grammar actually changes. He's constantly saying, they're your people, they're your problem, they're your people. And then when God, as we'll get to, offers him the ability to essentially supplant
to get rid of them.
And he says, no. And then he says, and I want you to reunite with them. I want you to, don't veil yourself. Don't run away from us. Come back. He says, come back to us. Right? Suddenly he's identified with the people. It's a really romantic moment. It's really amazing.
And the Lord said unto Moses, Go, get thee down, for thy people, which thou brought us to the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people, stubborn like the Pharaoh. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them. And I will make of thee a great nation. And Moses besought the Lord his God, and said, Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, when thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, For mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? turn from thy fierce wrath and repent of this evil against thy people. So Moses is mediating for his
and I
people.
love that Moses is also like, won't that be embarrassing?
Right.
It's so amazing, right? So he's reasoning in this way that's...
You see that
what would the Egyptians say?
There's what will the Egyptians say? Right. There's a warning here. I mean, it's that...
Just as God said, I won't forgive anybody who does wrong in my name, he is saying to God, don't do wrong in your name.
And your promises.
I want to express, I have so much empathy for Aaron, because I think Aaron in so many ways is like a storyteller. He's constantly mediating, and he builds, he's an artist, so he builds this golden calf, and it's constantly, like, you can't get enamored in what you build or create as an artist in a certain way, is one of the templates that it seems to be talking about, because he's constantly moderating between these two, and it's sort of like he's quick to fall in love with that which he's created.
Well, his job
and to view it as separate from its allegiance to how it should be properly aligned.
He's also the political mediator between Moses and the people, and he's played that role. And now Moses is, in fact, gone, so the prophetic voice is gone. It's not exactly surprising that Aaron attempts then to just express the will of the people, because that, in some way, that is actually the role that he's been cast in, especially with Moses now gone.
He expresses it and makes it this beautiful thing also. Yeah. And then...
This is also why when Aaron dies later in the Bible, the people mourn him more than they mourn Moses. The language of mourning for Aaron is very extreme because the people are very close to him, because essentially he's a populist, but he can't be the leader, right? He can't be Moses, because Moses has to have a distance from the people. The leader has to have enough distance from the people to understand that his dictate doesn't come from the people, it comes from something higher. And the minute that he goes missing, the people immediately start creating idols out of and then worshiping the thing that they themselves created, which, by the way, is the nature of democratic politics. And we should mention at this point that that's exactly, when you look for moral value in your political leaders, you're looking in exactly the wrong place. They're people created by your hands who you then turn your worship upon. You elected them and you made them. And then you say, why are these idols not serving my purposes properly? It's like, well, because you created them. That's why they're not serving your purposes properly.
And there's also an implication in the text that's a very strong implication, which is that if you dispense with that which is properly divine, you're going to worship something. And especially, and we could understand that if you understand that to worship is to celebrate and to pursue. And if you worship, celebrate, and pursue nothing, well, then you do nothing, right? You have no forward movement. And so if you're going to move at all in life, you have to worship and celebrate something. Obviously, if you destroy what's divine or turn your face away from what's divine, you're going to turn towards some sub-divinity. It's still going to rule over you. And so then the issue becomes, given the necessity of that you have to have an ideal that you're pursuing, the only question becomes, what's the nature of the central ideal? And of course, that's what the biblical corpus is trying to work out. But you don't ever have this option where, well, I choose to worship nothing. It's like, no, you'll worship your stomach, or you'll turn into Priapus, or like something's going to drag you along, because otherwise you just sit there and do nothing. You're stuck with celebration. Yeah. The thing you value enough to work for, the thing you value enough to make sacrifices for, of any sort, that's your God.
Human beings are wired for worship, in effect.
So what I find very impressive is that so the mountain now appears again as this microcosm. And so you have the animal at the bottom, you have licentiousness, desire, all these things that are at the bottom. And then Moses goes up, and it's as if it's also kind of expressing the problem of disconnecting, let's say, the high and the low. And that's kind of what's happening. Moses is going up, and so because Moses goes up, it's as if things below fall apart. And there's a need for Moses to be that mediator, and that's what he's doing. Even now, as God is saying, I'm just going to destroy these people, he's acting as a representative of the people towards God, and then he's going to go back down and act as a representative of God towards the people, right? So he really is the mediator between the two principles.
And he's also trying to help God figure out if there's a way of correcting the egregious error that the Israelites have engaged in that doesn't involve that they just die, right? Because if you commit an extreme error, one of the consequences of that can be not only that you do just die, but that you should just die. I mean, it was a tradition in pagan societies. If you were a general and you conducted a battle and you lost, it was like time for you to die, right? Because obviously you weren't the right person. There wasn't this was even the case with Japanese in the Second World War. Like if the Japanese leaders lost a major battle, it was incumbent upon them to dispense with themselves. And they couldn't believe, from what I've read, that American generals would get another chance, that there was this idea that you could be redeemed from your cataclysmic sin, right? Your failure to miss the mark. And here Moses is intervening with God to suggest that even though the Israelites have done something egregious and instantaneously egregious, despite evidence that they shouldn't, that perhaps there is a way forward that's better than merely just having them die as a consequence of their mistake.
I love Ben's point that in some ways God is using this as an opportunity to force Moses to identify with the people. I mean, it's such a beautiful image. And this story, by the way, this pattern, if people who are watching want to know that this pattern repeats itself in Scripture many, many times. And if you want to understand some of the stories of Jesus, for example, it's this pattern. So Jesus goes up the mountain, the disciples go on the waters, and now the waters become unstable, and now they're afraid. So Jesus has to come back down and connect the top and the bottom. Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray, the disciples fall asleep at the bottom of the mountain. So there's just all these iterations of how if you when the mediator goes up, let's say, or it disappears, then things at the bottom fall apart. If the point
fall into unconscious chaos.
Yeah, that's right. If the purpose of something moves up, sometimes that's a problem. It's like people can't cohere.
Okay, so why is it a golden calf that they turn into? Let's talk about the particulars of the idolatry. So
I have a quick question for Jonathan first, which is in Exodus 11, when the Lord's speaking to Moses, he says, "Let every man borrow of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor jewels of silver and jewels of gold." Yeah. Right? It's a collection of all the things that are of earthly materialistic value. And we see this echoed here.
But this is it. So you can see it. It's like there's two sides, which is that on the one hand, to make the tabernacle, God tells Moses that he's going to gather this stuff up, the same stuff,
precious.
to make the tabernacle. But now this stuff that came from Egypt is gathered to make the idol. And so it actually talks about the potentiality as exactly that, as a kind of neutral thing. Like, let's say money. Money is not moral or immoral, it's neutral. It's possibility. So you can take money and you can use it to kill someone. You can take money, you can use it to help an orphan.
Or put the jewels in the breastplate like we talked about yesterday.
Or you can create it in a way that elevates it. So it really does help you understand. And I think it's on purpose that it's ornaments. Because ornaments are non-functional things. They're not part of the productive reality.
Is it relevant that it's the jewelry that was taken out of Egypt by the Israelites?
I really think so.
So it's that they're recreating an idol out of the stuff that was taken from Egypt?
I think so.
Okay,
but it also has to do with the problem we mentioned, that Ben brought about the other day, which is that they're worshiping that which they should sacrifice. Right? And so it's a beautiful image. It's like, this is what they should sacrifice up to God, and they're worshiping it. So you can apply it to your life. Everybody will have images of it coming into their mind right away. It's like, this is what I should be giving to God, this energy, this, my money or whatever, and now I'm worshiping it on its own.
Well, that's why you see Aaron try to recast it, right? He's saying this is a vector for worship, guys. This is not supposed to be like the thing that you actually worship. This is just a way for you, right? There's a way for you to try to elevate. It's also important to know the reason that it's a calf is because it's obviously an Egyptian symbol, right? The last time that you've seen cows in the narrative goes back to the dream that Pharaoh has with Joseph, right? Where he has the dream of the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows and all of this. The wealth of Egypt is supposed to be signified by the cow. I mean, that's one of the animals that crops up in the biblical text a fair bit.
So is the golden calf, is it literally a worship of something like material wealth?
Yes. I mean, it's a worship.
The storehouse of
it's
material
also a fertility
wealth?
god.
Yeah, that's right.
Fertility, Canaanite fertility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when it's clear that one of the things that's really fascinating about the Bible's take on idolatry generally is that it actually is not a take on what idolatry actually is. It's kind of fascinating. There's a point made by Yechezkel Kaufman, who's a scholar of sort of paganistic cult versus monotheistic biblical Judaism, is that the way that paganism actually works is that you have a bunch of gods that have actual backstories, right? They actually exist up there in the ether. And so one of the sort of modern biblical critiques is that Judaism just posits, or the Bible posits, a God in contrast to these other gods, and he's actually just fighting it out with these other gods. And that's obviously not clear from the text of the Bible. The Bible describes idolatry as pure fetishism. Right? It's purely, there's an object and you worship the object, which is actually not really how idolaters worship, right? Idolaters presumably worship this as a symbol of a set of gods that don't actually exist. But the Bible says they don't exist so much so that we're just going to say straight up, you're worshiping this golden object, right? Which is why I think that modern people read this like, people used to worship golden objects, and the answer is no, people did not used to worship golden objects. They used to use that as a way of signifying something else that monotheism says does not exist. Right? What we're watching over the course of Exodus is actually, it's kind of fascinating, because Judaism tends to say that Abraham is the first sort of person who's spreading monotheism, broadly speaking. That's actually not evident in the biblical text. The first person who's actually enjoined to destroy polytheism is Moses, right? That's the transformative moment. And so all of Exodus is written in opposition to paganistic culture. And so when they make the idol, and then the Bible basically says that you're worshiping like an actual metal object, right? That has no other meaning. And that's why Aaron's attempting to recast that as sort of an intermediary and intercessionary thing for God. And God and Moses say no. It's really meaningful, and it also means that Aaron ends up being punished for this later on, because the commandment, it's this very bizarre commandment that we get to much later in the Bible. It's called the paraduma, the red calf, the red heifer. Right. The idea is that there are certain forms of impurity that cannot be alleviated by certain sacrifices. You have to find a red cow that is pure and purely red, and then you burn it, and then you take the ashes of that, and then you put it on the people, and this purifies them. It's obviously meant to be a punishment for what Aaron is doing right now in attempting to not just say no to the people. He should just say no. He should just say, wait for my brother. He's up there, but he doesn't have the. And by the way, he tries to excuse himself. Like 5 minutes from now, when we get to it, he's going to say that what actually happened with the calf is not what happened with the calf. Right? He's going to say he threw all the metal in the fire and magically it just sort of emerged as a giant calf.
Is it reasonable to consider him a careless populist?
I think that it's not that he's careless. I think that he's, to a certain extent, like every leader, he has to make the choice between whether he is going to be subject to the whims of the people at all or not. Mm-hmm. And what the Bible says over and over and over is that leaders who subject themselves to the whims of the people do not deserve the title of the great leader. They can be helpful, they can be the person who is an aid, but they can't be the great leader. And the reason the kingship is removed from Saul, for example, is specifically because he says, I'm going to listen to the people, I'm not going to listen to God. And so the Bible is a very anti-populist document. It really is. I mean, it says that there is a right and there is a wrong. And if you take into account what the people think about this thing, you're doing it totally wrong.
Well, we spent a lot of time before you arrived on the scene talking about the structure of Mount Sinai with the vertical axis, which was the extension of an ethos that unites people collectively, with the vertical axis, I think I said horizontal axis properly, with the vertical axis, which unites individuals and the people with God, and that the proper form of moral endeavor is the union of those two things. It's the union with God that simultaneously provides unity to the people. And the problem with the leader that you describe would be that only one of those axes of moral necessity would be being attended to at one time. And maybe that's better than being a pure psychopath.
Right, exactly.
At least you're in dialogue with other people. But all the people could wander off a cliff together.
Right. I think logically speaking, there's one other point in the text that I think is important for what we're going to get to, and that is Moses' argument to God here is really fascinating, right? He makes the people they're not going to look on you kindly if you do this argument, which is sort of an argument. What he's not doing is he's not making an offense to the people. They're confused, they're scared, I'm not there, I should have gone down. Or he's not doing that. He doesn't make any excuse for the people at all. He says, like, for your own sake, you shouldn't do this. And then his real argument is the original covenant. He says you've made two covenants, right? There's the original blood covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then there's the covenant we made 5 minutes ago at Sinai. They've abrogated that covenant, right? They wrecked that covenant, which is why he's about to destroy the tablets in 1 second. And then that is going to have to be remade. That covenant does not abrogate the original covenant. The original covenant still exists, even though they've abrogated. That's a covenant that cannot be abrogated by anybody.
I just want to point one last thing before we continue, is that just in terms of understanding the idea of the golden calf, or that the image of the calf or the bull or whatever, is that later when we come to the temple, there will be big bulls in the temple, but they're not the object of worship. They're supports for something else. And so
They're in their
it's not
proper
like
place.
making a bull is evil in itself. It's making a bull and worshiping it, which is a problem. Because like I said, later in the story, then you will find those used in the temple itself.
So, and this pertains to what you just brought up, Ben. Moses is talking to God, and he says, "Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self, and saidst unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven. And all this land that I have spoken of will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit forever. And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people." So thank God for Moses, if you're an Israelite. "And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides, on the one side and on the other were they written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, There is a noise of war in the camp. And he said, It is not the voice of them that shout for mastery, neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome. But the noise of them that sing do I hear. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing." This is a frenzy of sorts, eh? And is that a frenzy of descent, like untrammeled descent into the natural world?
I think of it as an orgy.
Right. So
Because
that's that
it
descent into the
uses
chaos.
mitzvah,
right.
Merging downward.
And that fits in with the fertility element, with the bull representing power, but also
Right, so that's
fertility,
that's so interesting in relationship to our culture, because what that essentially means, it's the rise of the dominance to the highest place of sexuality itself. Yeah. Of course, that's exactly what's happening in our culture, right? Because that's even become the hallmark of personal identity, and also the object of worship that borders on the mandatory, right? So
Interesting.
so
Before we get
interesting.
here, God both forgets and repents.
It is not the voice of them that shout for mastery. It's not triumphant. Neither is it the cries of those who are being victimized, let's say, but the noise of them that sing do I hear. It's celebration. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands and broke them beneath the mountain. Why? Why does he do that? Why does he? Is it
It's an image of what's already happening. Right? This is what's happening. It's like the order
he's
that comes from
dramatizing
heaven
that?
is broken, and so it's like all of it. The image all comes together at the bottom. It says that's why I think it also says it's like underneath, almost
Right.
underneath the mountain.
That's
at the
what it
bottom
says,
of the
yeah.
mountain,
Yeah.
things are broken and shattered and fragmented and not together. And so that's what he does.
So it's to drive the point home.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just to show this is what, like you said, the
You
covenant's
broke the
been
covenant.
broken.
You
That's
broke
right.
it.
It has been broken.
Right, it's broken.
Right, so he's making no bones about it in what he's communicating.
Well, I mean,
to the
he's a
people.
pure messenger of God, right? I mean, he's literally doing exactly what God just did, right? It says that God's anger waxed, Moses' anger waxes. The covenant is broken. Moses takes the tablets that are written, inscribed by the finger of God, the most precious object ever created, and smashes them at the base of the mountain. He says, like, what I'm doing is a physical representation of what God has already just done with the covenant.
Yeah, well, and to the degree that that what's written on stone is the inscription of the deepest tradition, what he's dramatizing is the idea that this idolatrous celebration, orgy, you said, is destroying what's most foundational to culture. He's dramatized. That's being dramatized in the text. It's what he's dramatizing by his actions.
Could we also see that, yes, he's a messenger from God, and I think there's clearly that verbal echo that sort of, the way God feels is his anger and then Moses' anger. But I wonder if there's a sense in which